Rhonda Boone, aka Miss Ty, aka Mama Ty. I have been an educator for over 20 years. I am a mother to a wonderful little girl named Zoe who is 6 years old, and I am a financial literacy activist. Thank you for joining us for Generational Wealth, Triumphs and Tribulations, where we look back to the past to help us understand the wealth gap that is our present and determine what we need to do to create a better financial future for the next generation. This episode, we are going to discuss sharecropping and tenant farming. After Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation to save the Union, African American men and Union soldiers met to discuss the best way America could help the newly freed African Americans reach the American dream. The request from these African American men was for land that could be cultivated in a skill they already had, as well as passed on to the next generation. 40 acres and a mule was supposed to be given to African Americans, and some African Americans did receive this. However, in 1877, there was the Great Compromise. During the Great Compromise, the Union soldiers left the South and the Ku Klux Klan was born. When the Confederate soldiers came back to the South, they wanted their land back. Many African Americans decided to stay and work as sharecroppers or tenant farmers. This decision would have a lasting and catastrophic effect on the wealth of the next generation and generations to come. You see, the sharecroppers worked and continued to be in debt to the landowner year after year after year, most often from unfair practices. However, the tenant farmer, because they own many of their materials and supplies and equipment, did fare a little better financially. So we're going to take a look at what it was like to grow up in the Jim Crow South as a sharecropper or a tenant farmer. Our guest, Luther Boone, who grew up as a sharecropper in North Carolina, and Lula Boone, who grew up as a tenant farmer in Georgia, will talk about their experiences. When you listen to their stories, you will see the impact that sharecropping had on families. In order to know where we're going, it is important to know where we've been. Let's honor our fiscal past and build a brighter fiscal future.
But sharecropping is a system used to replace slavery. My mother and father's name was May Lizzie Boone and Sherman Clyde Boone. They were sharecroppers. We had to farm for a place to live. We had to farm for food to eat. We had to farm for the bare necessities to survive. And what you farmed for, they took it all. You couldn't keep records. If you kept records like they would, then you could probably check them. But if you start keeping records, then you was targeted. You was one of those smart ones. And they could hang you whenever they got ready. And with nothing said about it. Sharecroppers had no rights, not even to vote. Only right you had was to work their fields. The social climate where I'm from was pretty segregated. It was two different worlds. The world of the landowners, and it was the world of the sharecroppers. It was very depressing. My father, the way he was treated, the way my grandfather was treated, saying yes sir, having to say yes sir and no ma'am to people younger than his grandkids. And when you asked him why, his response was, son, you just don't understand. When I asked my father, Daddy, why did he keep all the money? Boy, you asked too many questions. That was the response, the answers I got from my grandfather and father when I was asking as a child, why was there such a difference between what I see in the landowners and what I see in us sharecroppers. I didn't understand that, but my grandfather always told me, said, son, you just don't understand. After the slave was freed and we started sharecropping, the landowner wasn't obligated to do anything for us anymore. We worked with labor. Our labor paid for everything, the rent, the food that we bought, and we didn't make any money. My father never made a dime from farming. They took everything that he had, and sometimes they even charged him double for the food that he would buy on time for his family to eat. So sharecropping was worse than slavery, my aunt told me. My grandfather, it wasn't easy for sharecroppers back in the day. You couldn't speak out. My grandfather was threatened to be hung just because some white women in Como found him to be humorous, and they used to laugh at his jokes. And the guy that he farmed for told him, says, James said, I know that these white women down there at the brickyard said, you said you're too friendly with them. So you know if the husband decided to kill you, I'm going to have to help him. And he was the landowner he was the guy that my grandfather was sharecropping for. So he warned my grandfather that he would have to help them kill him if they decided to hang him. Well, the house that I lived in, my childhood was old. There was no more than a barn. With no heat, no running water, and that's where we lived for 18 years. One house was about as bad or as good as the other. 3 houses that I lived in as a child growing up. One was born on the North Carolina-Virginia state line. All of them were full of snakes. The last house had the most snakes. And I lived in that house until I graduated from high school and moved out. Well, I started school in 1955, the year of segregation, Brown versus the Board of Education. Well, my school didn't integrate until 12 years later, 1967, the year that I graduated. Well, from the first through the 3rd grade, I attended school quite regularly because I was too young for the field. Once I became field age, the only time I saw school was December, January, February, March, April. We was back in the field planting for the harvest, and we were going to be doing all the way up until December. So I spent very little time in school. It was frustrating watching the school bus for 12 years from different states, different cotton fields. It took its toll. Seeing my mother and father work like slaves for nothing, not even being able to buy school clothes or books, it just taught me so much about the conditions of the black sharecropper. Only one teacher in the 1st grade was interested in me learning. From the 5th grade out, not one teacher asked me if I understood a problem that they was explaining on the board after I had been out of school for 3-4 weeks straight. Not one teacher asked me if I understood. I mean, it makes you feel like a second-class student in a segregated black school. Evenings, I would see the bus returning from school. I would see the white bus pass first, but they would be having so much fun. I mean, the bus be packed. About a half hour later, you see the colored school bus, they call it, pass, almost empty, quiet. So that was a different world that we was living in. One was full of joy and the other one was full of pain.
My parents' names were Virgil Lee Lawson, and my mother's name was Eva Mae Lawson. And my father's parents' names were William Lawson and Lula Lawson. I was named after my grandmother. They would travel all night until they came upon somebody that would pay them for the work that he was doing on the farm. And that's the way he raised my father, and my father came up and did the same thing. I walked to school. I can remember one afternoon, there was so many snakes, same as my husband talked about the snakes, but they were just on the outside. And the path was on the left side and on the right side. And one day, I was on my way home, and I was going to go down the right side, and I just seen all these snakes. There was so many snakes, I just looked at them, and I turned around, and I went down the left side. I was so young, I guess I didn't have sense enough to even be afraid of snakes. And I went home and I didn't tell my parents anything about it. And so, but my father was adopted. I never knew my biological grandfather. But the grandfather that I did know that adopted my father raised him up, not sharecropping. Actually, now I don't know how he come by it, but he always owned his own property. And when something happened, with the man that he was, working with or working for, whichever one of them it was, if they had a dispute, my grandfather just loaded up the family and moved off. And my dad would tell me about sometime they would be on the mule wagon with everything that they owned. They would travel all night until they came upon somebody that would pay them for the work that he was doing on the farm. And that's the way he raised my father. And my father came up and did the same thing. And he owned his own property, far as I knew that he did. We picked cotton, we picked the cotton, we shook the peanuts, and my dad got paid, and I guess that, was the way we paid for where we lived. And but then the man that owned the property that we were living on passed away, and another owner came into the property, and he wanted to sharecrop. My father was not having that. I remember as a little girl, he came home one day and he was actually cussing. And I heard him telling Mom, what it was all about. The man wanted him to sharecrop and he was not going to do it. And within 3 weeks, we had moved off of that property. And that's when my father moved. We moved to this place about maybe 8-9 miles away. And then my father stopped farming. And then he went out into the private sector and he found a job, where he got up and went to work. I worked 5 days a week, came home and did the same thing the next week. And then eventually he saved enough money and then he bought his own land and he built his own house. I have memories of the first time I saw Ku Klux Klansmen. And this particular day, me and my two sisters was sitting on the side of the road, and we looked down the road and we see this procession coming. We didn't know the word procession at that time, but it was all these men. They were dressed in black and was wearing these white hoods, and they was driving this black shiny car on a real slow. The cars was on each side. Some guys was on the each side, and some was in the front, and some was walking in the back. Then my two sisters just sat there and looked at them go by, and we didn't even tell my parents about it until years later. And that was the first time I ever encountered the Klansmen, because where we lived, all black people lived around in the neighborhood where we lived in. You know, we saw white people when we went out, but we never was, associated with white children until I got older.
1967, when I finished high school, we was on our way out. We was going our separate ways, and we decided to get together. We had one little get together, social gathering before the students, the high school students from 6th or 7th class departed. Well, we was up there, and some white guys came up there in a black car from Virginia burning a paper cross. And they said, all I heard is not a member of the KKK was a black son of a bitch. And that was when my friend walked over to the car, punched one of them in the face, and they got out, and we fought for about maybe 15, 20 minutes. And when the cop came there, they was only looking to collect us. The people who started the fight was all bruised up, but they was allowed to go. And I stayed in the woods for all night in the swamp as the cop looked for the black guy that was involved in that confrontation. So that was what I left. But they're the founders, we probably would be in prison right now. In the South, my uncle, who was born in the late 1800s or early 1900s, used to travel from Como to Washington, D.C. And they used to hitchhike catch a hop on the train and travel through Richmond. They had to get off the train, walk around Richmond, and so they could get to D.C. Because if they got caught on that train in Richmond, the Richmond police force had rubber hoses attached to broom handles. And that's what they would beat them with. So Richmond was feared. Richmond was deadly for blacks trying to get to the north on the train.
We met at Robbins Air Force Base in Warner Robins in 1971. That was the first time. Yes, 1971. That's where we met, Robbins Air Force Base, and we started going together the end of 71. And we went together for another maybe 7 years, and we got married in 1977, and we've been married to each other now for 44 years come July the 26th. That'll be 44 years.
Sharecropping ended because of the machine age. Being poor, seeing that made me who I am today. Because when I left in 1968, 1967, 1968, I promised my mother that I would not leave them in the cotton field. Because one day watching the school bus pass, I got a little upset, and I told my mother that I was going to leave her in the cotton field. And then that's when she brought up, son, what you're looking for is not on our school bus, it's in you. What's on our school bus belongs to the one who own the school bus. But what you find in yourself is yours. Nobody can take it. That's why when I left home, I was ready for war. I was ready for battle. I didn't know fear. I didn't know not to speak out. I didn't know not to let them have their way, because I challenged them in every turn.
Hi, my name is Zoe and I'm 5 years old. Grandpa and Grandma, why do you think financial literacy is important?
Because to build wealth for the generations to come. My story, I want to be a role model for the kids out there that's without hope, that's lost, trying to figure out a way. There's always a way, but you got to find your own way. Every way is different. So first you got to take care of yourself, and then take care of the others around you who need your help, that you can afford to help. So I want my story to be an inspiration to the kids out there that feels like the world has forgotten. Because I felt the same way as a child growing up in the cotton field, watching the school bus day after day, year after year. I feel like no one cared. But the only one that matters is you.
According to historical data, in the 1900s, farmers were paid approximately $14 a month for their work. Around that same time, an acre of land was selling for $20. According to the USDA, in 2000, the average value of an acre of land was over $1,000. If sharecroppers were properly compensated, they would have been able to amass land to build houses, to start their businesses, and to create a legacy.
Multiple legal challenges have halted a debt relief program intended to correct a history of racial discrimination against Black farmers. The Emergency Relief for Farmers of Color Act was passed by Congress this spring as part of the American Rescue Plan. It would provide $4 billion in loan forgiveness from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The act also lays out an additional $1 billion for grants and college scholarships for farmers of color. However, U.S. District Judge Marcia Morales Howard sided with a white farmer from Florida who sued to stop the program. She acknowledged the history of discriminatory behavior against Black farmers, but wrote, Congress must also heed its obligations to do away with governmentally imposed discrimination based on race. That injunction is one of several seeking to prevent these funds from getting into the hands of Black farmers. I want to bring in John Boyd Jr. now. He is the founder and president of the National Black Farmers Association and joins me from Boynton, Virginia. John, welcome. Great to have you with us again here on CBSN. Now, you have said that you will fight this decision all the way to the Supreme Court. Tell us why you believe this money from Congress is legally justifiable, and what do you say to those who are challenging the law?
Well, basically, this is a real setback for Black farmers, and farmers of color at planting season. And a few things I would like to clear up. This is not money for Black farmers and farmers of color. This is debt relief at USDA. You have to have a guaranteed loan or a direct loan. And what white farmers are doing in this country, suing Black farmers, is a continuation of what we've been enduring in this country for many, many decades. A continuation of Jim Crow and sharecropping and all of these things, where it looks to me as white farmers want all of the money and all of the resources instead of sharing with other ethnic groups, in this case, Black farmers. And it looks as though every time we try to get some redress from USDA, we're having to wait So I've reached out to President Biden to discuss this and to see what the administration may be able to do. These white farmers are filing these lawsuits in very, very conservative courts around the country, Florida and Wisconsin and Texas, where we don't think we're going to get a fair share in those very, very conservative courts in this country. But we're going to continue to press on. But people need to know that the National Black Farmers Association needs your support right now. It costs money to fight these cases and all around the country. And so far, we've been meeting all of these deadlines and raising the issue of historic and continued discrimination at the United States Department of Agriculture. And one thing these judges haven't done is really acknowledge the discrimination that we still face today as Black farmers and farmers of color. So this isn't discrimination that happened 10 and 20 years ago. It did, but the discrimination also continues today, and the courts are not looking at those very, very important issues as well.
And you say you just recently reached out to the Biden administration. Did you receive a response?
Well, I'm supposed to go to the White House on the 4th of July, but not to talk about this. And I'm hopeful that the administration, in this case, President Biden, will hear my plea to sit down and speak to him about this. It looks as though if Secretary Vilsack had moved more swiftly to get the payments out to Blacks and other farmers of color, the actual debt relief itself, we wouldn't be in this predicament right now. So here we have the banks that came out against this measure, that didn't want to work with Black farmers by somehow saying if we got these monies, it would be hurtful to banks. And now you have white farmers who are saying we're causing them harm in some sort of way if we get debt relief at the United States Department of Agriculture. And in reality, it's been white farmers who have been getting the debt relief the whole time. That they've gotten $500 billion, white farmers, in the U.S. Farm Subsidy Program. Almost all of the direct loans and rural development loans and all of these loans at USDA have went to large-scale white farmers in this country. So my question to them is, well, how many times are you going to get? And they don't want to talk about that. So how can we have racial healing in this country if first white farmers don't want to admit that we've been discriminated against by the United States Department of Agriculture? We need to sit down and have a real discussion in this country, because we're living in two Americas. One in rural America, where you have the rebel sign and all of these flags that sit higher than the United States flag, and they look like to me, white farmers. And then you have Black farmers like myself who just want to be treated with dignity and respect and walk into the local county office and be able to attain these services here in this country. And people, that has not been happening in a fair and equitable manner. And all of the numbers support that statement.
John Boyd Jr., thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
So now we have this information. We have a deeper understanding of what happened to sharecroppers and what happened to tenant farmers. We have first-hand information. And I am sure that their stories, the stories that we heard, are similar to other Americans who lived those experiences. So what do we do now? Well, the first thing is that we cannot let those stories die. The truth is that the wealth gap was created and cultivated many years ago. People lived in fear. Walking off of a landowner's property that you sharecropped was dangerous. Many people lost their lives making that choice. So the first thing that we can do is make sure that those stories do not die. The second thing we can do is learn from those stories. Sharecroppers were not able to profit because of control. They didn't own anything. Ownership is so important. Ownership is key. We need to make sure that our young people are starting businesses. Make sure that you're starting a business. Several streams of income. Most millionaires have several streams of income. Some are passive but they do have several streams of income. We need to change the consumer mindset to the producer mindset. We are the trendsetters, but are we making money off of setting these trends? We have to change our mindset. And we have to model these things for our young people. Also, real estate, land, owning property. That is another way that we can generate wealth. That is another lesson from the stories of sharecroppers and tenant farmers. When you are saving your money, save with a purpose. When you are growing your wealth, grow with a purpose. Do you have a financial strategy? Make sure that you are holding yourself accountable and that you have a circle that is also holding you accountable. There is nothing wrong with going out and enjoying yourself and having a great time. But there is something wrong with leaving this earth and having a GoFundMe to raise money for your funeral services. We're supposed to leave money for our loved ones. So please, take these stories, take these lessons, and put them into your everyday lives. Thank you so much for joining us for Generational Wealth, Triumphs and Tribulations, Episode 1, Sharecropping and Tenant Farming.